National Review's Charles Cooke on how Kamala Harris might shake up the 2024 presidential race. That and more on this episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast.
No, the devil's got no hold on me.
All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Gutowski. I'm also a CNN contributor and the founder of thereload.com, where you can head over and sign up for our free weekly newsletter that'll keep you up to date on what's going on with guns in America. This week, we've had another wild ride here in the political realm. President Biden dropped out of his re-election campaign, turned the keys over to Kamala Harris in a surprisingly smooth transition to her now being the presumptive nominee. She's already wrapped up delegate pledges to put her over the majority mark that she needs. And that has some significant implications for gun policy moving forward, which is why I want to have one of the best gun writers in the country on the show, Charles Cooke from National Review, who hasn't been on in a while. Welcome back to the show, Charles.
No, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Always obviously love reading your stuff on this topic and having you on. You were one of the first guests, I think, when we started this show years ago. So it's good to have you back. Tell people a little bit more about your background for anyone who might not have heard of you.
Well, I moved to America in 2011, as you can presumably hear from my accent. I'm not from here originally. I'm from England, but I'm now a proud Floridian. Became a citizen in 2018 and didn't grow up as a Second Amendment advocate or interested in guns at all, really. But that changed the more I looked into the issue. So that by the time I was 20 or so, I was firmly sold on the right to keep and bear arms.
Yes, and now you are writing for National Review. You're an editor at National Review. You also write for the NRA magazines as well.
Yeah.
So you've you've had quite a lot of experience in political analysis, especially the sort of gun politics side of things. So that's why I think your insight is going to be pretty interesting here. Let's start with the shift from Joe Biden to Kamala Harris. Do you view that as significant in the grand scheme of things when it comes to the 2024 campaign?
I do in some ways. I expect there'll largely be continuity because the position that the Democratic Party has taken on guns does not exist in a vacuum. It is the product of what they think they can get away with in the public opinion environment. But there are some differences between Harris and Joe Biden. The first one is that she, at least thus far, has felt it a lot less important to say, I support the Second Amendment, but than Joe Biden has. And as one reason for that is that she actually doesn't support the Second Amendment. She filed an amicus brief in Heller all the way back in 2008, in which she and her co-signatories argued that the Second Amendment doesn't protect an individual right. Joe Biden has hinted that he thinks the same thing, but rarely. She's been more open about that. The second difference is she, and this is a low bar given Joe Biden's record, but has even less of a respect for the Constitution per se than Biden does. And she is someone who made the news in 2019 by laughing in Joe Biden's face on live television when he said that she couldn't ban AR-15s by executive order. She laughed and then said, let's say, yes, we can. Well, you can't. Joe Biden was actually right about that. You need congressional legislation and then almost certainly review by the Supreme Court. She doesn't seem to think that matters. She's also made comments at various points about doing other gun control by executive order, giving Congress 100 days or whatever to get its act together in her estimation, and then to do it herself. If Congress won't act, I will, I think she said. So she does seem to have a more unilateralist approach than Biden did. And relative to other presidents, Biden's been pretty unilateralist on guns. I think we talked about this last time I was on your show. So those are the two sort of approach differences. And then on the details, back when she was running against Biden, she took a really out there position on modern sporting rifles, which was that she wanted a mandatory buyback. That's her Orwellian phrase, which essentially means that you don't have a choice. Your guns are confiscated, but you will be remunerated in some way for the confiscation. As far as I'm aware, and Stephen, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think Biden's ever gone that far. I think his two ideas were to ban the sale of so-called assault weapons going forward. And at some point, he's floated the idea of adding those that were left behind to the NFA, the National Firearms Act. Right. I don't think he's ever mentioned confiscation, unlike her. But she's on a very short runway here before the election, and she's going to want to limit her vulnerabilities. So I would be surprised if any of those ideas or that sort of talk came up as part of her election campaign. What happens if she wins is a separate question.
Yeah, that's I think the first part I want to explore a little bit more, because you're right. Those are the big differences, I would say, between Biden and Harris on the issue of gun policy. Now, certainly Biden, like you mentioned, it's sort of a matter of degree with a lot of these things between the two of them. They largely agree on the kind of restrictions they want. They have some disagreement about how to get there, at least where this sort of limit is, because which is interesting in the sense that Biden's rulemaking, his executive action on restricting things like pistol-braced equipped firearms or homemade gun kits, those seem like they're probably not going to stand up in the test of the courts after the Supreme Court struck down the Trump era bump stock ban, which was justified in very similar ways to what Biden has been doing. And Harris's main disagreement with him is that she thought they should go even further than those things. But yeah, and then the same thing with an AR-15 ban, an assault weapons ban, right? So-called assault weapons ban. It's more a matter of degree. They both want to ban them. They just have a difference of opinion on what to do with the tens of millions that are already in civilian circulation. And in both cases, Harris would be to the left of Biden. And yeah. But the question is, will she change course in this election, I think, to start off with? Because as you mentioned, I think there's good reasons why she might not. And if you look at what she's done in this extremely early stage, we're only less than a week into this. I guess when Reload members get this, it'll be exactly 1 week in, and when it goes public on Monday, it will be just over a week. And she's mentioned guns in her speeches and in her ad. The ad just talks about wanting to be free of gun violence, doesn't talk about policy positions. But she did mention 3 specific policies in her first 2 speeches. And those are basically what Biden has been running on: universal background check, red flag laws, and an assault weapons ban. She doesn't talk about the confiscation aspect of it, the mandatory buyback. So far, there hasn't been a shift. Do you expect to see a shift? And if not, why not?
No, I don't. The Democratic Party's aims on guns have been the same since around 2012-13. Barack Obama downplayed gun control until after Sandy Hook. He didn't even make a push for it after the Aurora, Colorado shooting. He then adopted 3 main policy proposals. One was to ban the sale of so-called assault weapons. Another was to limit magazines to 10 rounds. And the third was to achieve so-called universal background checks. And that has broadly been what the Democratic Party has wanted to do until about 2018, where we had the Uvalde abomination, and then they added red flags to the list. The federal role within red flag legislation tends to be limited to funding, but they still have more. interest in it than do the Republicans. So those four things really are the aims. Kamala Harris, I mean, not to stray too far away from the question of the Second Amendment, but as a general matter, Kamala Harris has to be careful that what she brings to the Democratic Party as a replacement for Joe Biden isn't a lopsided loss. And I say that as somebody who thinks she can win, but the polls are close. They're 1-2 points between her and Joe Biden. The risk is that those 1 or 2 points are spread much less efficiently than Joe Biden's were in 2020. For example, there is just no great advantage for a Democrat in a presidential election running up the score in California or in New York, but doing worse in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, or Georgia. And if you are a party, as the Democrats are, that have made beating Donald Trump the main aim, if you talk about it in eschatological terms, you are prone, I think sensibly given their rhetoric, to downplaying any more divisive policies that you might have, whether that be on firearms or fracking, in the hope that you can get through the blue wall in the Midwest. So I would be shocked if between now and the election, Kamala Harris staked out a position on guns that departed significantly or even at all from that Joe Biden has staked out and the institutional Democratic Party has staked out, because I think it will hurt her in those Midwestern states she needs to win. Right.
The idea basically is that Kamala Harris has a generally pretty liberal record. In fact, I think she was rated the most liberal senator during her brief time in the Senate when she was a senator from California. And she has a whole slew of sound bites where she's taking very liberal positions, including on guns. And so she may want to try and shy away from that during this campaign. That's what you're saying, right?
That's exactly what I'm saying. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that she won't go back to it once if she's won office, which is often what happens. I mean, as I said, Barack Obama, the first mention, I think I'm right in saying, of a ban on so-called assault weapons from Barack Obama came in 2012. So, there is a difference between running for president and being president. And she may well
Obama
push it.
Didn't emphasize that aspect. He was the thing he tried to get was a universal background check bill with the Mansion 2 bill, and that's been one of the interesting things about Joe Biden's campaign is that he has been much more aggressive than really Democrats since Al Gore on pushing assault weapons. But but Biden may have supported, Obama may have supported it, and lots of Democrats have supported it, but it hasn't been the marquee issue of a presidential campaign since the 90s. So Biden was already kind of pushing out there on it, right?
Right. And of course, there's a continuity there because Joe Biden was instrumentally involved in passing while in the Senate.
Right. Which is one of his big talking points about it.
Yeah. I do think that Obama moved an enormous amount. I mean, you're right in saying it wasn't his centerpiece, but he started off in 2008, 9, 10, referring to guns infrequently. Once he won with a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate, they didn't move to do anything. Right. But by the end of his presidency, he was putting out executive orders and he was praising Australia. I mean, this was something that I used to write about a lot. He was praising Australia, which was gun confiscation. It's not true that he called for it in the United States, but he did say we know how to do it. Look at Australia. So he had moved a long way.
After he was already president, right? After he was done with re-election. But in the elections, he was, the Democrats had been a lot more cautious about this issue until recent years. And one of the things that Biden seems to have been doing right before he ended up dropping out was going back to guns and highlighting it and emphasizing it even more so as perhaps a play to try and, goose enthusiasm among his base voters, because he was having a lot of trouble with this coalition of trying to get them excited about voting for another Biden term. And this was one of the issues he went. He went and spoke at Everytown's convention for the first time. He had the Surgeon General come out and make a bunch of gun policy proclamations. And, he's been laser focused on assault weapons as his marquee gun policy, assault weapons ban. And so, it's interesting, Harris coming into that environment where she may have, at least for the moment, solved some of the enthusiasm issues that the ticket was having. And I wonder whether she continues to go down that same path of emphasizing gun policy, or if she tries to even de-emphasize it a bit as a way of getting away from the too liberal label that she's probably going to have to struggle with against.
Yeah. I mean, I just think, and I don't just say this because I'm an advocate of the Second Amendment, although I obviously have a rooting interest here, but I just think it would be a profound mistake given the Midwestern state challenge that she has, which we've already talked about, and B, the growth, sometimes overstated, but nevertheless real growth in gun ownership among non-white men. It is just increasingly the case that you cannot divide up the country by gun owner and non-gun owner in the way that you could in the 90s and early 2000s. And she had to be careful with that because it's not a cultural signifier in, say, Georgia in quite the way that it once was. So I think it would be a profound mistake on her part to do it. That doesn't mean she won't do it. She isn't a particularly good politician.
Yeah, she didn't run a great 2020 campaign, that's for sure. But, it's been 4 years. She's been vice president. Maybe she's improved.
Sure.
She's certainly this 1 week, she's seemed pretty competent so far. But that kind of goes well into this interesting state of gun policy in this election, because, the very early polling, again, a lot of this polling that we're getting right now coming right after the RNC, right after the Trump assassination attempt, right after presidential switch on the Democratic ticket, is maybe not going to be the most reliable stuff. We might want to wait until things settle out a little bit, but we do have some indications on this. And it does line up with what we've been seeing. Biden has done very poorly on gun policy in particular. His approval ratings there have been lower throughout his entire presidency than even his overall rating, which wasn't great to begin with. And if you look at the most recent YouGov poll that asks about Trump versus Harris on guns, Trump actually is polling better. More people think he would handle the issue better. And yet at the same time, the Republicans and Trump have gone quiet on the issue. They're definitely de-emphasizing it. They may not be changing positions necessarily. They haven't articulated a change in policy, what they want to do, but they just haven't talked about it. It wasn't at the RNC. It's not in the platform. Trump didn't mention it in his acceptance speech. What do you make of this dichotomy here? Because we're seeing Democrats emphasize it, even though they're doing worse in the polling on the issue, and Republicans have gone quiet.
I think that it is in large part the product of conservative successes on the Second Amendment for 30 years. I don't think that the invisible Second Amendment within the Republican National Convention platform is equivalent to, say, abortion, where Republicans are clearly running away from the issue because it hurts them. I think that it is a non-factor because it has, since the mid-1990s, largely been a rout politically, and the Democrats are left having to push the issue. I mean, if you look at the changes over the last 30 years, we've got 3 Supreme Court cases. One that affirms the individual right to keep and bear arms, one that applies that individual right to the states, and one that creates a usable test. Doesn't mean a perfect test, but a usable test for gun regulation. We have 9 constitutional carry states now. In 2001, there was 1. And there are 6 states that you and I wouldn't approve of on concealed carry, but they're all effectively a shall issue. The number of gun owners number of guns has increased enormously. I mean, to, what is it, 500 million of them, as opposed to 170 million in 1990. gun ownership is diversified. The assault weapons ban is gone. Now, that isn't to say there are no challenges, and there certainly shouldn't be any arrogance or euphoria here. But I think that the reason you aren't hearing much about it from the right is that they just feel as if they've made huge progress on this issue. I don't think they're downplaying it.
That's interesting. So you don't view the lack of attention to this issue by the Republican Party recently, this is kind of a recent change because Trump had spoken to the NRA twice already this year, and one of the things that I thought was notable in his last speech at the NRA annual meeting in May is that he emphasized this idea that gun owners don't vote, which is something you do hear sometimes in the gun rights movement. People say something like, I've never heard like a really detailed explanation of what that's supposed to mean. I think it's just the concept that almost half the country owns a gun. And obviously if they all voted just on guns, presumably with the way the parties break down, Republicans would win every race almost. That's kind of the basic concept that I get from when people say that. Right. But Trump himself said it at the NRA. And then now he's gone away from talking about the issue in recent, he gave a record long acceptance speech. He didn't mention gun policy or the Second Amendment at all in there. It feels like they think it's holding them back in some way. Perhaps
no, I don't think so.
Voters.
I'm not saying you're wrong. It's just not the sense I get. The sense I get is they think they've won. And that it's because there hasn't really been a contested. I'm trying to think. I mean, other than the 2 years ago, there was that bipartisan bill, which I didn't like, but it didn't do an enormous amount. I mean, if you had said 30 years ago, here's what this bill does to people who at that point were fairly convinced, and with good reason, that the Second Amendment was going to go away over time. If you had said that's the bill Congress passed, you'd have said, okay, fine. The last big fight over guns was in 2013, and the Republicans won it. And since that point, I mean, every state that is not about the 7 or 8 states that are implacably hostile to the Second Amendment has expanded gun rights. I mean, it's just what happens when Republicans win. You saw, for example, what happened in Florida the moment that Republicans got a supermajority after 2022. In Louisiana, Democratic Governor Bell Edwards was swapped out for a Republican. They passed constitutional carry and loosened some other gun restrictions. In Kentucky, although they have a Democratic governor, Andy Beshear, the state legislature passes whatever gun rights expansions it wants. He vetoes them, and then it overrides the veto. This is just what states have done from Georgia to Nebraska to Idaho in the last few years. You can now drive essentially, 70, 80% of the country without having to have a permit to carry a firearm. I just think, and there's a risk to this too, but I just think that Republicans have got to the point at which they think, well, this isn't an issue that people are thinking about. It's not an issue that is riling people up. Whether you're right that there are actually a whole bunch of people out there who should be voting but aren't because they're not being asked to is a really interesting question. But I think it's more likely this is overconfidence than it is embarrassment.
Interesting. So when you look at the way these two campaigns have gone the last couple of weeks here, you think it's more about Democrats have to emphasize this issue to try and turn out the gun control voters that exist, whereas Republicans don't need to necessarily emphasize it, or they don't feel like they need to emphasize it because they've had a lot of success, and those people who care about that are going to turn out anyway? Is that kind of where you're at? Or?
Yeah, I broadly think that. I don't think it was smart. I'd have put it in the RNC platform, but I think it was inspired by that sentiment, yeah.
Okay, interesting. So you mentioned Andy Beshear there for a moment. Well, let's talk about the vice presidential possible picks that Kamala Harris has, and whether you think there's any likelihood of balancing the ticket on this issue, so to speak, especially given the direction the Democratic Party has gone, as you mentioned, like they're pretty well solidified almost across the board. Even all the moderates that are being talked about kind of have a lot of the same gun control positions that Kamala Harris has, or at least it's maybe like a Biden-Harris difference where it's a matter of degree more than the goals of a policy.
Yeah, and before we get to the VP stuff, I mean, one reason for that is that they are more observant of what polls often show than of how gun control gets legislated once the details are the topic of conversation. And so what you'll see is 90% of Americans want universal background checks, they'll say. And there are some polls that show this. It's just that when you put it up for vote in Maine or Oregon or Nevada, it either passes or fails by 52 to 48.
Right. It doesn't perform as well in practice, especially when put directly to voters, as it does in polling.
Yeah, so the Democratic Party, I think, has reached a point at which even the moderates will look at the polling and say, "Oh, I can back this," what they think is sort of moderate gun control. The VP question with Harris is very interesting, given what we were talking about earlier, because the whole point of the VP candidate, insofar as VP candidates matter, is to moderate the ticket and presumably to win a state she needs. And if you pick Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, you're trying to win Pennsylvania. You're probably trying to help yourself in Wisconsin and Michigan as well. If you pick Mark Kelly in Arizona, then you're presumably trying to win Arizona, and maybe you think that will help you in Nevada and possibly Georgia. That being so, the last thing you want is for that person to reinforce rather than offset the reputation that Harris has for radicalism. And I actually think that is a risk with Mark Kelly. Now, we'll talk about this sensitively because Mark Kelly's wife, Gabby Giffords, was shot in the head, and it was an appalling thing that happened. But I don't think, for example, that if they pick him and then he is too vocal about gun control in Arizona, that it's necessarily going to do for Kamala Harris what she needs to be done.
He did found one of the major gun control groups, named after his wife. Obviously.
So I have a feeling that the job of the VP candidate for the Democrats is going to be to do the opposite, which is to downplay this stuff. Now, I should say, I don't actually think the Republicans have done a very good job on this themselves, because I think they've doubled down on Trump with J.D. Vance. Sure. And Trump is actually not that popular. So if I had been advising them, which of course I never would be asked to, then I would have said go for someone else. I'd have picked a Glenn Youngkin or a Doug Burgum long before I'd have picked J.D. Vance. The Democrats probably won't make that mistake. And if the candidate that they choose ends up sort of running in the same lane as her on guns, I can't see how that's going to help, because all of the states that she needs are pretty pro-gun. Pennsylvania is pretty pro-gun. Michigan, Wisconsin. Wisconsin was the last state to put a constitutional right to bear arms in their state constitution. But that sort of shows you that it was still a live issue in 1998. And then Arizona is famously pro-gun. It was one of the first constitutional carry states. Open carry state too. Nevada is a pro-gun state, and Georgia has some of the loosest gun laws in the country. North Carolina is another one that she needs to do better in. So I'd be shocked if they went all in on it.
Yeah, but I guess that's the issue, though. That if you're thinking about this particular issue, gun policy, and you look around at those people you've mentioned, Shapiro, Kelly, that they also support all three of those major policies, including assault weapons ban.
Yeah.
They may not be as vocal about it or make it the forefront of what they talk about on guns, but they do support those things. The only one who really offers significant variation is kind of Bashar from Kentucky. And I don't know if he fits that other profile of Kentucky's not a state they're trying to win. Maybe it helps them in other sort of Midwestern or Southern states, but I don't know. Where do you, if she's trying to balance this issue on the VP ticket, who could she possibly pick?
Yeah, so I think Beshear is fool's gold. I don't have anything against the guy, but he wins in Kentucky for two reasons. One is that the Beshear name is famous. His father was governor. People trust the Beshears and are willing to vote for a Democrat in a very red state as a result. And the second is that the Republicans have a supermajority in both houses of the state legislature. And every single veto, literally every single veto that Beshear signs onto the paper is overturned. So if you're a middle of the ground Kentucky voter, which is more conservative than in many other states, you can vote for the Democrat with the name you trust without actually giving up any policy. And I think that makes him look artificially moderate and attractive. And I would not, if I were advising the Democrats, counsel them to take him.
And I mentioned this on the news update, but Beshear doesn't even really fit that old blue dog pro-gun Democrat mold anyway. His biggest pro-gun accomplishments are kind of allowing things to become law without trying to veto them. Now he does oppose an assault weapons ban and things like this. So it does bring some balance, but even there, it's not like your traditional actual like hardcore pro-gun Democrat.
See, I think their best shot would be to pick someone like Josh Shapiro, who just seems moderate. The seeming moderate point is often lost on people, but there are some people who just seem moderate, and there are some people who don't.
And
Joe Biden,
high-profile, competent things like fixing I-95, or some of the other stuff he's been involved with.
Also, he just doesn't look radical.
Policy-based.
Like Joe Biden has benefited from this. He doesn't seem radical. If you tell a voter who's 73 years old, Joe Biden is a radical, they will say, no, he's not. And they remember him for 50 years in the Senate. If you tell them that Kamala Harris is radical, they might believe you. And she is, but they might believe you. It's partly affect. And Josh Shapiro has the affect of somebody who is reasonable. And if he were picked, even if he holds the positions that you adumbrated, then he might not pay for it. I do worry for them with Mark Kelly, just because he's very well known for founding a gun control group. And again, he's lived through a personal tragedy. This isn't a criticism, but that's one of the things he's done. You can't run away from that. Once you've done it, you'd have to lean into it. So I think their best option is to pick someone who has a moderate affect and just ask them, please don't go on and on and on about guns when you're talking to people in Scranton.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And so let's just briefly here at the end, because obviously we don't know, we can't know this, and we can't know what the campaign is going to do either. But if Kamala Harris becomes president, would you expect her then to be more true to the stuff she said while running in the primary? I mean, primary campaign, to be fair, is something where you are trying to run usually towards your base, and then you run back to the center. And in general, that's how it usually goes, not every time, but do you think she'd be more true to that? Do you think she'd stick with how the Biden administration has done things? Or do you think where do you see her going if she is elected?
I think she'll move into a much more hostile anti-Second Amendment position. And I think one of the reasons for that, Stephen, is that she just has no muscle memory at all that pushes her in the other direction. I mean, if you look at someone like Joe Biden, Biden is bad on the Second Amendment. He's been terrible. But he knows enough people who are gun owners or Second Amendment enthusiasts that there is something in him that at least comprehends where they're coming from, even if he thinks they're wrong. And he sort of in recent years lost the ability to triangulate properly as president, but he used to be much better at talking about that when he was a bit younger. Well, she's never had that. I mean, she's a San Francisco progressive. They don't have that. She doesn't know those people. She didn't grow up with them. She's not friends with them. I doubt she's met many of them. And when something terrible happens, which it will, the instinct is going to be go do something, and I think she's going to just go straight into it. And I mean, she doesn't even have a constitutional check on her here intellectually, because she doesn't believe that there is such a thing as an individual right to bear arms, which she's made clear. So I would expect her, even if inadvertently, just to go back to the positions that she held the moment she's not worried about election. And perhaps it would take a second term. Oh God, this as a thought, second term of Kamala Harris. But I would very much see her as reverting. I just don't believe her on this.
Okay. Well, look, we'll have to have you on again down the line to see how well we predicted things, I guess. To see how well they turn out or how things go. By the way, in the meantime, one of the other things that, at least in certain circles, you're well known for is your appreciation for roller coasters.
That's true.
Have you been to any parks this summer? What have you been?
I haven't, but in 10 days, I am embarking for national review on a trip. I'll keep the details of it mysterious for now, but that will involve some roller coasters.
Okay.
But
nice.
I have not been on. I take the kids, so we've been to Universal Studios, done Velocicoaster, and Disney Guardians of the Galaxy. It's pretty good. But I haven't been to an amusement park outside of. Actually, it's not true. That's not true. I went to Virginia. I went to Busch Gardens, Williamsburg in April, which was awesome. You
went without me. I'm very offended.
Well, it was a family vacation to Colonial Williamsburg, and on the last day, I bullied them into going to Busch Gardens.
I haven't been to Busch Gardens. Have you been to King's Dominion? Or?
I have, absolutely.
Okay, what do you prefer, the two?
I went to King's Dominion with Cam Edwards. Speaking of guns and roller coasters,
nice. He was just on the show last week.
I love Cam. He's the best. Well, I think Busch Gardens Williamsburg is the superior park. It's certainly prettier.
Okay.
The setting is incredible. And they have some terrific rides, but so does King's Dominion. Intimidator's something else.
I was gonna say Twisted Timbers and Intimidator. That's a pretty good one too.
That's true.
They did get rid of Volcano though, which was another fantastic.
I never, that broke my heart. So I'd wanted to go on that since I was 13 when I first read about it in an English newspaper. Yeah, but
it was great. It really
by the time I got there, it was closed, and then they took it out.
Yeah, it's sad. I want to try Top Thrill 2, but I don't know if that's ever going to actually open for real.
Yeah, it's not running.
And then immediately closed it, and I'm kind of worried that because it's like Zamperla, which is it's not a new manufacturing, but they haven't done like these big scale roller coasters before. Right. I don't know, but you know what? I think my girlfriend wants to go to see Creed. Okay. And they're playing Hershey in August. So
that's the park I need to get to.
Yeah, have you never been to Hershey?
It's killing me.
I was there last year. Because they opened Candemonium, which is a B&M, and then they got an RMC because they did Wildcats Revenge, which is apparently
that's right.
It's apparently supposed to be perhaps the best RMC, which is kind of surprising. Although I think Iron Gwazi, which is down your way.
Now I've been on that. That is truly incredible. Yeah.
So I don't know. Well, you're welcome to come with us when we go, perhaps to Hershey at the end of August.
Okay, just let me know when you're going because I've never been to Hershey Park. I really want to go.
It is a fantastic park. It's probably only it's the only individual park other than Knoebels, which is another Pennsylvania, just totally different experience sort of park, old fashioned park. But everything's Six Flags and Cedar Fair merged, and then all the other big parks are owned by Universal or Disney. So Hershey's kind of your only maybe I guess Dolly World, right?
Dollywood, and then
Dollywood.
What's it called in Holiday World in Indiana?
I think that might be owned by a chain or something too, though, right? Either way, aren't they together? I don't know.
I think Holiday World's still owned by the family, but I could be wrong.
I've gotten us far afield from policy, but
the roller coaster supplement.
Here's a secret for no one tell the Freebeacon this, but when the NRA had their annual meeting in Dallas when Trump was president. We went to Six Flags Over Texas, right? And I was supposed to be there to cover Donald Trump's speech, and I did. I just was covering it from. I remember it was like a crappy barbecue place. Yeah, in the Six Flags. No one knew the difference, and so nobody sent this to the Free Beacon. But that's a true story, and we rode all the Six Flags Over Texas, although it was all 6 American flags at that point, because if you recall, one of the flags over Texas is not corporate friendly anymore. So it's just 6 American flags now. But the new Texas Giant, I think, is the best ride there.
Oh, it's incredible. RMC for the win.
Good park, though. It's small. It was much smaller than I expected, because I thought everything in Texas, right?
Right.
I figured it'd be like Cedar Point size, but it was more like just a normal Six Flags America, King's Dominion type park. Yeah. It was still good. Anyway, I will let you know about our Hershey trip, and maybe we'll get an update if that happens. But thank you so much for being with us this week. We will have to have you on again real soon. Tell people where they can find more of your work.
So I write at National Review. I also write in America's First Freedom, the NRA's magazine. And I'm on Twitter at Charles C.W. Cooke. It's Cooke with an E.
All right, wonderful. I'm going to tell everybody a little bit about the Dispatch now that's sponsoring this episode. So head over to that. Okay, it is time once again to talk about the Dispatch. We're doing a promo swap. We've been doing it for a little while now, and it's a pretty easy thing for me to get behind, because I've been a paying subscriber at the Dispatch really since it launched. And I think it's one of the best publications out there, especially in your center right media, your conservative media, in large part because they focus, like we do here at the Reload, on hard news reporting first. That's what they were founded to do. That's where they put a lot of their energies. I read the Morning Dispatch every single day to keep up to date with what's going on in the country, in politics, and in news from a national perspective. And I would highly recommend it to anybody who's listening. There's a free trial if you follow the link in our bio here or down below in the description over at the Reload's website, or in the newsletter. You'll find the link to that free trial, so you can not just take my word for it, but go and try out a subscription over there. You'll get access to all kinds of great original hard news reporting. That's their sort of bread and butter, I would say, especially stuff that it's great to read the Morning Dispatch because it gives you a little bit of a different approach, a little bit of a different take on these stories that they're finding and that they're reporting, and they're gathering information and bringing it to you. And it just has a different editorial take as well. It's more for the politically homeless, for people like, I think there was 53% in the most recent Pew poll that wanted a different option than what they have in the current presidential election. So if you feel that way, I think you probably find yourself right at home over at the Dispatch. Of course, they have big name and analysts and opinion writers there as well, who come from a center right perspective, people you've heard of before, I'm sure. Jonah Goldberg, Steve Hayes, Kevin Williamson, Ala Pundin, if you've been deeply immersed in online media for the last 15 years like I have, one of the best writers out there. And it continues on down the line. They've got a really great lineup of writers over there. Chris Steyerwalt's another really good one. It's just a fantastic publication. And this is actually getting long. I don't think I was supposed to go on for this long, but it's easy to do that when I'm talking about the Dispatch, because I have a lot of respect for what they've done. Another independent publication, startup. They've really had a great success, and I think they're the model for our industry, and also a place where you're going to find value if you go over and check them out. So, click the link, get your free trial, try them out for yourself. You don't have to take my word for it. But yeah, the Dispatch, head over and check them out.